중학교 1학년이니까 건강하고 그리고 남편 하는 일 잘 되고 저도 이제 건강하게 새 식구 잘 화목하게 살았으면 좋겠어요.
2015년에는 연애도 하고 공부 열심히 해서 장학금도 타고
내년에는 세계 여행을 꼭 가고 싶습니다.
졸업했거든요. 그래서 취업됐으면 하는 생각이고요.
우리 가족이 조금 더 안정적으로 잘 지냈으면 좋겠고 또 우리나라에 좋은 일이 좀 많이 생겼으면 좋겠습니다.
Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to Upfront. I am Kang Chidi. As you just saw, our team went out to the street to listen to some of New Year's resolution. I wonder what kind of New Year resolutions that you have set for yourselves. Now, ringing in a new year, and speaking of New Year resolutions, on today's Upfront, we're looking to the future hopes of the younger generation of Korea and discussing some of the challenges in those in their 20s and 30s are facing. And for this discussion, we have a great panel to kick us off the new year with. First up, to my left, Mr. Lee Young, head of Youth Policy Research Center at Yeouido Institute. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Happy New Year. And to my right, we have a politician turned entrepreneur, Mr. Lee Jun-seok, CEO of Classic Studio. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for inviting me again.
Thank you. And of course, Mr. Ryu Jong-soo, co-president of the Sustainable Development Global Network. Happy New Year. All right, so first question to this studio. The biggest concern as a young man or woman in their 20s and 30s living in Korea, what is the number one issue, problem, concern?
At the Yeouido Institute, we have Youth Policy Research Center, and there we do a lot of surveys. And from those surveys, what I found out is that single most concern or issue among young people is job. It's job. It's, I think, and that goes for not only for Korean young men and women, but it's actually a problem that we face globally. For example, before I became the congressman, I was working for the World Economic Forum, and at the World Economic Forum we talk a lot about these global issues. And from there, every year, youth job for youth was always the number one topic.
What was it like for you, Mr. Ryu? I mean, when you were in your 20s and 30s?
Well, in 1980s, we had both personal and idealistic subject. One, to get a job after graduation. Second, to have a democratic government. We were politically very active then. But actually, that was a society where we believed that we can get a job after graduation and the marriage, housing, children would be followed naturally. We lived a very different society than the society this young generation live today.
Well, I want to add to this because he pointed out an interesting thing, saying that he had his goals set clear when he was in his 20s and 30s. But 20s and 30s these days don't really have a goal set, because they have this sympathy and they have this common hardship they're experiencing. But unlike his generation, where he had this goal of getting a job and having a democratic government, there's no common goal for the 20s and 30s generation. So in my opinion, it was I really lacked that kind of a sense of having a common sense and a common goal set for the generation. I think that is something we have to prepare for the better future.
All right, so not having that clear goal, that set direction.
Right, if you walk up to any grandparents of your age and they're going to say, we had a common goal in 1950s and 60s. We wanted economic development. And people of my parents' age would say we needed a democratic government. But our generation, we have like small goal sets, things like tuitions and jobs and things like rent prices. But we don't have a grand goal that we have to achieve in common with together with the generation.
So certainly a struggling generation that we're going to talk about today. A lot of Koreans in their 20s and 30s are putting off, actually, and in some cases giving up on pursuing romance, getting married, or having children. Now, let's first take a look at this report to find out more.
A generation of younger Koreans who are putting courtship, marriage, and childbirth on the back burner has emerged in Korean society. There are multiple economic and social reasons as to why.
I can date, get married, and have children after I've saved up enough money. But since we're in tough economic times, I've had a hard time finding work, so it's difficult for me to make enough money for that.
Women need to either quit their jobs or take time off from work when they give birth. But realistically, it is difficult to go back to work after taking maternity leave.
The biggest problem is money. I can't get married because I can't find a job. And it'll be difficult to have children even after I get married. I think all of these things are interrelated.
The first reason is college tuition fees. According to the Ministry of Education, the average college tuition fee each year is $5,800. That figure is about 5 times higher than it was in 1989 when college tuition was liberalized. Because of the strong pressure students feel about their college tuition fees, a lot of students take on part-time work. That leaves them little time to date and be in relationships. The second reason is the severe unemployment crisis. As Korean society tends to think highly of people who get jobs at public or major companies, competition among the younger generation is fierce. As more and more young people are having trouble getting jobs, they tend to apply strict conditions when choosing a spouse. There's a view in Korean society that people who work for major companies and are paid higher salaries are best qualified for marriage. Thirdly, an increasing number of young couples are avoiding having children because of pressure from rising childcare expenses and a lack of infrastructure for raising their children. Economic pressure is also a core reason that the younger generation has avoided courtship, marriage, and having children. Young women are putting off starting a family because they worry that their careers will be interrupted. This is also because society still believes that childcare is the responsibility of women. The vicious cycle of the younger generation putting off courtship, marriage, and childbirth for economic and social reasons continues.
So a lot of struggles for the young generation in their 20s and 30s, and they're giving up on getting married and having children.
Well, we have a different political system now. We have a different society now. So we really have to adapt to it and say the system 30 years ago was a lot different from what we have right now. Say back then, if a 20s and 30s, if they graduate from college, well, government could just say, go work in the factory. And that did work, you know. They set up industrial complexes in rural areas, and they would just, the economy would just start growing. But the thing here we have now is we are in an era of diversity here. People have different visions, and people have different targets. So I think, the solution that worked like 30 years ago is no longer going to work with the different generation, because we have never been to 30 years ago, and my parents' generation have never been into our minds here. So I think we got to bridge the gap here and try to work together to solve the gap here. Yeah.
What do you think about the older generation lived without internet or cyber world? Now this generation, young generation, live with the internet and the cyber world. How does it affect?
I think that's one of the major factors here. Because back then, as I mentioned, when the government could control the media and try to mobilize the people into a certain direction, then it was a lot easier for the government to actually act some policies into society. But right now, people have different opinions, and people have different goals they want to achieve. And it's really hard for policymakers to actually focus on a goal and try to achieve it in a systematical way. So I think, it's no longer, I don't think the problem of youth problem here is not solely, it doesn't solely depend on government policies now.
Indeed, a very complex system that we live in different times for the young generation here in Korea. And I want to go back to the starting point of this, maybe it's a little too harsh, but vicious cycle. So let's go back to the point where they go to college, and they start off on student loans, many of them. And we have one of the world's highest college interest rate in Korea. I mean, everybody has to go to college. It's unparalleled here in Korea. And the problem is money, of course, like I said, student loan. If that's addressed, if that kind of burden is eased somewhat, then are we looking at a happier generation, do you think?
So the problem here is like, if you're gonna make an investment, you want some outcome out of it, right? So if you want to think your investment was right, then you want to make the best out of the investment you made. But the thing here is that most of the Korean college graduates these days think that college graduation does not benefit himself or him or herself because they did it because they thought it was a requirement to get a job. So I think that's the kind of thing we have here. So whatever the tuition is, they don't think they are benefiting from it. So that makes the investment just unjustifiable for most of the people.
Well, I think it's about 80% of high school graduates go to universities in Korea, and it is amongst the highest, if not the highest in the world. But if you think about it, it's, we really cannot stop a person to get a higher education. I think as a human being, I think it's natural, and I think it's a good thing for a society to encourage for its citizens to get a higher knowledge, to acquire knowledge. So going college itself is not a bad thing, I guess. But the point is, as these two gentlemen has mentioned, is that going to college doesn't equate to getting a job. And that's certainly a problem, and I think that there's many dimensions within. So, for example, there's not enough good jobs, period. But I think the definition of good job needs to change. I think that we can work on that. And second thing is that from the private sector, when I talk to private sector, they always say that today's college education doesn't teach or doesn't prepare students well for the job that they provide. So they have to spend more money on retraining these college graduates. So I think what we need to do is, we cannot discourage person to go to college, but I think what we can certainly do is to really have that, all party talk. When I say all party talk, all the stakeholders, let that be businessmen, students, government, we need to get all together and say, look, we can create jobs, or first of all, we have to rediscuss what the good job means, what it can provide. But at the same time, we need to adjust our college education, or even before, to prepare these youngsters well for the real world. Well, when I say real world, the society where it's well prepared for the jobs they're going to take on. So I think it's more than just a simple question of, do we need to send more kids to college or not?
According to recent statistics, a person trying to get married today in Korea would need, like you said, roughly $200,000 to get started. And securing housing makes up the biggest portion here. And we're also talking about wedding ceremony itself, which is very expensive. We have, of course, wedding gifts, right, for each other's family, and extravagant honeymoon, I guess. So let's move on to housing then, because it did take up the biggest proportion here. I mean, we hear about the government's policy trying to sort of encourage people to buy affordable houses, I guess, and the loans for the newlyweds. Is it not working, or is it not enough? What went wrong here?
I think if your goal is to have a house, to own a house when you're getting married, I think that's a wrong goal for today's day and age. It's just it doesn't matter which country you go to. I'm talking about the advanced nations. It will be very difficult to buy a house at age 25 or 30 or decent housing at any big metropolis. So if your goal is to have a house, I think that's a wrong goal. If you want to have enough money to do 전세, I think even that is a wrong goal as well. for today. I think we should start to change, or at least policy, or we need to start to encourage that we need to, as a newlywed, maybe you need to really consider rent, like the US, like the Europe. I think we need to start to move towards that trend.
Okay, what's your take?
Well, it seems the monthly renter is very popular in U.S. However, the younger generation in Korea seems that that's wasting money. That money could have saved, then they can buy a house.
Or
Their
raise
philosophy
kids.
has been pretty much fixed in that sense.
What I meant to say is that providing affordable housing for people in need is definitely something the government needs to consider and needs to work on it. That's for sure. But what I meant to say is that affordable housing doesn't have to mean that you have to own a house at age 25 or 30. You can still work and you can accumulate and then you can save and work towards having a house. You know, if you look at the financial crisis only a few years ago in the US, you know, the US encouraged owning a house as one of the #1 priority. And look what happened. You know, I think we have to consider that, look, today, Seoul, as a major city in the world, it's going to be impossible to buy a house at $20,000, for example. You just cannot, it's not going to happen. So if your goal, life's goal, is to own a house, that's good. That's a good goal to have. But that shouldn't be that shouldn't happen at age 25, and that shouldn't be a precondition of getting married.
And I think this shouldn't be perceived as any kind of clash between generations, because from the plummeting housing prices and a low interest rate, nobody's benefiting from here, and they are also losing money from their houses, and the younger generations are suffering from the change in the rental system here.
Right, so we are talking about some of the challenges for those in 20s and 30s and going through tough times in terms of landing a decent job that they like and having to give up or delay on marriage and children. All this is bound to deal a heavy blow to the Korean society, economy as a whole, in not so distant future. So take a look at this next report.
Korea has been faced with a low birth rate since 2001 and has one of the fastest aging populations in the world. If Korea cannot raise its current birth rate of 1.2 children per woman, the country is looking at the prospects of a huge crisis in the year 2100, when the number of people over the age of 65 would make up over 48% of the entire population. A decrease in population could hinder the country's economic growth, and the job market is already being hampered by a low birth rate and aging population. It seems like a competition between the generations. The older generations, comprised of those in their 40s to 60s, has already passed the employment rate of the younger generation in their 20s and 30s. The older generation wants to put off the retirement age because of longer lifespans, and the younger generation wants more jobs as well. These generational conflicts are widely expected to deepen and emerge in various aspects of the Korean society. Now is the time to come up with some solutions, answers for Korea's young generation that's giving up on pursuing love, marriage, and children.
So we talked about the low birth rate and aging population here in Korea, and obviously people putting off a lot of important decisions in their lives. So it's easy to blame government policies here. Is it wrong, or what do we need to do here? Let's first talk about government policies.
I mean, government policies can it really deal with this kind of a low birth rate problem? I think we got to learn from the nations that experienced this before us. Say Japan, did it really successfully with their various policies? Did it overcome this low birth rate problem? How did the U.S. overcome this problem? I think there are different solutions there, and I think this is an East Asian thing here. But Korea and Japan, they're really reluctant to receiving immigrants. So when I said this with an economist, he would say that if Korea and Japan were to accept immigrants from other nations, say like India and China, as the U.S. did, it would be really easy for it to overcome this kind of workforce-related low birth rate problem.
All right, so we are talking about possible government policies to tackle these issues. And now at this point, we are joined by a demographer who says these problems, low birth rate, aging population, might have far-reaching repercussions down the road if not addressed with the right approach. Now, meet Mr. Michael Teitelbaum, a senior researcher from Harvard Law School. Mr. Teitelbaum, thank you so much for joining us today. A first question, low birth rate, aging population, these are not unseen in other countries. What are some of the phenomena that you see in Korea that you think is Korea specific?
Well, it's true that other countries have gone through these experiences, and in fact, most countries are aging. Their populations are aging because most countries are experiencing declines in fertility, and that's what causes population aging. But what is unusual about Korea is that its very low fertility rates are due to delay of marriage among young adult Koreans, and in many cases, decisions to not marry and therefore not have children, because very few Koreans have children outside of marriage.
And you've said a low birth rate and aging population are likely to bring a rift between different generations in Korea. What do you mean by that? Could you elaborate it for us?
It will have many impacts. It will require numerous adjustments from Koreans and from the Korean government. For example, the retirement age, which is quite low in Korea, while life expectancy is very high in Korea, those two don't work together. You're going to have to consider, I think, in Korea, a gradual increase in the retirement age. There will also have to be attention paid to the education system, which, as I understand it, has evolved into a system that has very early close of elementary schools for young children. If you close the elementary schools at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that makes it very difficult for parents to both work and have young children.
All right, Mr. Teitelbaum, let's leave it there for now. Thank you so much for sharing your time and insights with us. Michael Teitelbaum from Harvard Law there. So he was talking about a potential generational gap and tension, conflict. This is serious. What do we do?
I think, for example, going back a little bit and talking about the low birth rate, I think the demographic issue that we have, the problem that we face, is a ticking time bomb. And it is quite sad in a way that in politics at least, we are not seriously talking about this issue. You've mentioned at the beginning that I think within this, the government has a role. Well, I should say politics has a role. And I think politics has a major role. Politicians, whatever we talk about, whatever we do in terms of within the space of politics, it leads the society into a certain direction. Right. And I think this low birth rate, aging society, this is a type of problems that no one has ever faced in humanity, period. This is a real problem, and it's going to hit us like a storm, and we really need to sit down. And again, I bring in this concept of we need to have all stakeholders, government, youth, older generation, whomever, need to sit down and say, look, what are we going to talk about? What are we going to do about this serious problem? And going back to low birth rate, I think throwing money is one of the solutions, but today's trend is if you're going to spend money, you have to spend money right. Having a low birth rate is not just about providing women more support. I think we really need to create a society where there needs to have a hope. You know, when I talk to a lot of young generation, you know, affording a child is a problem. Obviously, it's something they need to concern. However, a lot of times they say, "Look, you know, I really do not want to bring a child into this world because there's no hope." So I think we need to really talk about how we can change our society into more positive, more bright side. Just to say, look, at the end of the day, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We need to really create that environment.
Well, we started with the low birth rate issue, but what really becomes an issue is later when we have fewer workforces left for our economy to prosper. In that case, I mentioned immigrants before, and the second part we have, the other option we have is making the women work. That means preparing the environment for the women to work and join the workforce. Because in Korea currently, the statistics show that women get only paid 67% of what men get paid. That's a statistic. So we have to bring that number up to the status where we have an equal work opportunity for both genders. So I think that is another area that we have to start working on here.
That's true.
I think what he said was is important. We need to look into our immigration policy and see where we need to go on that front. But it has to be a mixture of different tools. So immigration policy, when it comes to workforce, I think it is something that we need to look into. But low birth rate, that's not going to solve a low birth rate. I mean, if you look at the US, they have a very flexible immigration policy, but at the same time, they do have birth rate of 2.04, I think, which is a lot higher than Korea. So how does a US, the largest economy in the world, can still achieve population growth, not only through immigration policy, but within the birth rate, is something that we really need to look into and see what are they doing right. That is something that really we need to sit down and discuss.
That also relates to how we create jobs here, because in Korea currently the government is pursuing this creative economy here, but are there enough engineers, are there enough people who can make this creative economy prosper? How are you going to source these people? So those kind of questions we have to solve together so that we can actually create a new type of economy where we can bring in immigrants and we can bring in women to work, and those kind of systematic work we have to work on.
And I want to dig a little deeper on what you said earlier. Spending money, basically you're talking about, I guess, incentives or tax breaks for people who give birth, whatnot. Yes. That's not going to work, you said, and you emphasized the need to create that kind of environment. How do we do that, do you think, Mr. Lee? Where do we start? Flexible working hours?
Definitely.
Working from home? Is that going to work?
Because women these days in Korea, we have, regulations have been set where the companies have to actually let the women workers actually get at least like 6 months of rest, right? Is it when they have their childbirth?
Right.
But that is not true in the reality. People leave their jobs when they have children, and people really hesitate to come back to their jobs because how it's really about how the ambience of the workplace they look at the woman who gave birth to child. So I think it's really a cultural thing here, but we have to really overcome that.
And if you actually want to come back to work after giving birth, we saw some reports that talked about some women who felt the need to come back even before the 6 months was up because they feel threatened. They feel like their positions were threatened. They were concerned that their bosses may not be too happy. So things like that culture, like you said, needs to be addressed, I guess. Now, I want to continue talking about how to address and fix these problems moving forward, and maybe the government's role in all of this. And before we do that, let's meet a person who is playing sort of a messenger role, communicating the young generation's feedback to the government for more effective policy making. Meet Mr. Shin Shin Yong-han, chairman of Presidential Committee on Young Generation.
Korea's younger generation is having a hard time finding jobs, applying for internships, and even getting part-time work. The Presidential Committee on Young Generation has put a lot of effort into supporting younger adults. We're trying to help them find jobs, advance into overseas markets, and start their own businesses. We have put the most emphasis on fostering talent, apart from building up their qualifications and helping them follow their dreams. Moreover, the committee supports young people who are looking for work overseas or want to start their own businesses in other countries, which is important in the global era we are living in. I've seen a lot of young people who have given up on their dreams and lost their confidence. They feel isolated from society. But they should be more independent when making decisions and take a leading role in tackling the challenges they face. In that way, they can become leaders of their own lives. So I hope those in the younger generation can become their own employer and make their own hours.
All right, so quite a gloomy conversation to kick us off with year 2015. So to make things better, to have a happier younger generation in Korea, I want to talk about some of the solutions, although it may be a little difficult to come up with all the solutions ourselves today. What kind of policies do you think are needed down the road?
Oh, they're just...
much to do.
There's so much to do. We cannot say one policy will solve all the problem that we have.
That's true.
We have to really, I think we need to have a dialogue amongst all stakeholders. And I cannot say it enough because right now what is really missing in today's society, in today's, this democratic conversation is that there is no democratic conversation. And within there, we have to just let all the people in and say, look, what do we need to do as a whole society to solve this great problem? And you say it's a generation gap, but I think we're in the same boat. We're in this together. So not a one single policy will solve dissolve a generational gap issues or housing issues or aging issues or low birth rate issues. It has to be a mixture of variety of different tools and medicines, and that we have to have a very giant conversation, and I'm afraid it's going to take some time. We're not going to, even with that process, we're not going to have an answer tomorrow. But it's earlier. It's better to start this conversation today than to postpone it for tomorrow.
I wonder, that was a sort of a big picture kind of question. Then what do you plan to do in 2015 from your position, from your capacity as the head of Youth Policy Research Center?
So for example, we talked about the definition of a good job, right? One of the misunderstanding between the older generation and the younger generation from our research shows that older generation thinks the younger generation doesn't want to have a mediocre job. When I say mediocre job, and I shouldn't say mediocre job, but they think, the older generation thinks the younger generation is avoiding jobs at small to medium-sized companies.
Right.
But what we found out is that 6 out of 10 wanted a job and they were okay to have a job at SMEs. So right there we have already a mismatched information, right? But what the younger generation wants is that there are so many SMEs out there. They cannot find a place to get an information about good SMEs. So for example, all these large corporations, you can go on the online and you can find billions of information on Samsung, for example. But it's really hard to find a good information on SMEs. So I think what government can do is that we can create a marketplace or even an online site where we can provide those really needed good information. And that is something that we can do as a policy-wide. And there's just a variety of things that we can do. We talked about the half tuition thing, right?
Right.
We are already reaching half tuition. it's a $14 billion in total. Next year, in 2015, the government will spend, a government plus universities, obviously, they will spend about $7 billion. So effectively, there will be half tuition reached by next year. So there are many things that we are doing and we will do that is working towards resolving some of these issues.
And that's there's a takeaway for you, I guess, for your position, I guess. No?
Well, Mr. Lee mentioned how this is there needs to be a giant talk here between the generations.
Right.
But I think what makes the giant talk is it's an aggregation of small talks in families, I think. Because I really liked it when I had a chance to talk to my father about how they overcame these kind of problems in the past. Well, I had that kind of misunderstanding there too, saying that, well, we're in different situations, so this solution is not going to work here. That was my kind of take on the issue before. But after the talk, I would say that, well, my dad had the same kind of problems that back then, and that kind of conversation, that dialogue really helped me in understanding how, the kind of the sharing hardships we had in the future and in the past and the present. I think that's the kind of start point we should have. And the secondly, I think it's about how we're gonna relating to the job issue. I mean, how we can create jobs that benefit both here. So I really was surprised when I found out that Naver had created new jobs for seniors. Creating new jobs for seniors so that they can monitor internet, how the internet flows. So how they monitor articles and see if they are good for the younger generations and or not. I think those kind of jobs, they can co-work together and they can create new jobs there. But before I saw that article, well, our society had been starting to see this job problem as a confronting type of situation where the younger generation jobs and we were thinking that there were fixed number of jobs and we were cannibalizing from each other's jobs. So I think I now understand that it's not that kind of situation now. So I think we should really co-work together to create jobs that we can work together.
So create a new pie instead of fighting on the same pie or piece of pie. Now, speaking of a dialogue, and maybe this is an example of a dialogue that went totally wrong, I guess, or not well received, at least in the Korean society. I should correct myself. There was a controversial move by the welfare ministry, the Korean government, and a very short-lived one as well. So basically taxing people who live alone. And it was shortly after scrapped, of course, due to a lot of heavy criticism by the people who actually live alone. Are we reading the problem not fully, or not? Are we not reading the problem right here, the Korean government? You're a single man. So if your government decided to tax you for living alone, how would you feel? Would you feel more encouraged to find somebody out there and get married right away?
Well, what did I do wrong? Why am I getting penalized?
Only if you could find that special somebody. But what's your take on this?
Well, as we mentioned before, marriage is an important thing.
Yeah.
Well, I want to find my spouse with enough time here. I don't want to be rushed by the government to make any important choices here. So I think, government could actually come up with a penalizing type of option here, but they can come up with incentives also, right? So I think they can have a different approach, and they shouldn't have been on the table.
Right.
Any
takeaway?
I think I do have a problem with this.
A lot of people did, actually.
Actually, but if stepping back, I think we need to stop really have these negative incentive policies. We need to have positive incentives.
Reinforcement, yeah.
Right. We need to encourage people to get married and have child because they think it's good for them to do so. And they are really hopeful and they want to be part of the game. But if you're pushing people to get married because they don't want to pay a tax, maybe it will work for a couple of years. First of all, I don't think it's going to work anyways. But these type of negative incentives will only create more negative vibes in the society. So I don't even know how this came about, but I definitely do not agree with this.
Well, I'm confident that this kind of punitive actions would not do any good, but the kind of interesting thing I found out was there are on TV shows these days, there are TV shows where they raise kids on the show, right?
Yeah.
One of my women friends said, "Oh my God, I want to have twins."
Oh yes, there are cute twins out there that are very
no government
popular.
could actually push a woman into making that kind of remark, saying, "I want to have twins," but the TV show actually made it. So, I mean, that's the kind of a positive incentive that we can put out there.
Right,
I mean, it was
and I
very
guess,
effective there.
Yeah, and so I guess creating the system for the younger generation should be the number one priority. And at this point, we have a lot of government-driven policies or welfare system for the relatively older generation because we are going to have a lot of aging population, basically. So there are some who are saying, in the big picture, we need to create that environment for the younger generation. So channel that kind of money for the younger generation so that they want to sort of land on mediocre jobs and think it's okay and get married and not have such extravagant wedding ceremonies, I guess, and have children. Any ideas on that?
I think what we've been doing for older generation is not a great extras. I think for what they have done for this country, they do definitely deserve a good life. But if you look at the poverty rate of older generation, Korea is amongst the lowest in the OECD. So that itself shows that we haven't been really taking care of our elderly, older generation. So some of the policies that we've implemented this year for these the older generation is something that we have to do. And in fact, I think it's too late that we've done this at this point. You should have done it a long time ago. So channeling that money into youth policy is a wrong idea. It shouldn't be a give or take. That is something that we have to do as a society to take care of our older generation. But for the youth, we need to have a different ideas of how to solve these problems. I don't think it's one or the other.
All right. Do you agree with him?
Well, I was really surprised when the government actually makes decisions to cut down like elderly funds and elderly pension funds. I mean, the government's propaganda was to say, "Oh my God, we want to cut down debts for the younger generation, so we can't put this burden on the younger generation." And surprisingly, the elder generations really accepted that propaganda and actually accepted their pensions being cut. So I mean, it was really surprising for me because from a younger generation, we cannot expect that kind of reaction from similar situations. Say, for the half tuition thing, if we say we're not going to do half tuitions because our economic status is not as good as we thought. I mean, the younger generation wouldn't react in the same way from our experience. So I think the elderly has really common. Elderly citizens are really thinking for the future of the younger generations, and I think, including me, has started to understand that they are trying to come to the middle ground here, so they can cut down their welfare receivings, and we can also go to the middle ground and cut down our spending, and then there's the middle ground that we have to approach together.
All right. So we've had quite a run for the past hour talking about sort of a gloomy reality for the younger generation here in Korea, and hopefully for a happier New Year 2015. I want to get your final thoughts on today's issue, and maybe I will start off with you, Mr. Ryu.
Well, as we start the new year, I just hope that to younger generation understand it's okay to be poor when we start out. And we built our wealth and security as we go forward. So just we're starting new year, just have a positive outlook for yourselves and this nation.
Okay, and Mr. Lee, of course we have two Mr. Lees here, but Mr. Lee on my right.
Well, in the beginning I mentioned how like the grandpa generation had their own goal of achieving economic development. My parents' generation had the goal of achieving political democracy here. Well, I think our generation's goal is to actually achieve some kind of welfare society. I mean, if that goal is set clear, then we as a generation could move together and try to, breach all these gaps and achieve this major goal here. So I think if that is our goal, I think we have a lot to study, we have a lot to talk, and we have a lot to, discuss, and we should not hesitate for it. Right?
Okay, and Mr. Lee.
You said that it looks gloomy, that we talked about the very gloomy things for the youth, but I think there's a hope. From my research center, we have a lot of conversations with today's young generation, especially college students. And my God, these kids are incredibly talented. And they're really hopeful, and they're very diverse. So it's really a group of, I would say, people. Whenever I look at them, whenever I talk to them, I think there is definitely a bright future for Korea. But there's this huge energy, and I think they have the right to rebel. It's in their age, they need to, I think. Even with these gloomy situations that we have, if we can just talk a bit more, and if we think thoroughly and come up with some of the grand solutions for youth in 2015 or ongoing, I think it's not going to be a bad situation.
So not such a gloomy closing to our discussion today. All three of you, thank you so much for joining our program, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year too.
And that does it for the very first edition of Upfront in the year 2015. Our team would like to wish all of you a Happy New Year once again, and hope you stay tuned with Upfront, of course, in the new year as well, not only through airwaves but also online. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.